Margaret had been working at the same corporate office building for nearly 5 years. She wasn't an employee anyone noticed much, at least not in the way people noticed the busy office workers in their sharp suits, carrying important papers and talking in meetings. Margaret's job was to clean the office. She would arrive early in the morning before anyone else showed up, carrying her cleaning supplies. While the office workers enjoyed their coffee and began their days, Margaret quietly went about her routine of dusting, mopping, and making sure everything was spotless. The employees didn't know much about her, except that she worked hard. She was often seen pushing her cleaning cart down the hallways, and occasionally someone would pass by and say a quick hello or nod in her direction, but that was about it. Most of the time, she was invisible to them, but that didn't bother Margaret. She wasn't there to make friends or to seek attention. She was there to do her job well. After all, she had been doing this for many years, and she had learned how to navigate the silence of the corporate world without being noticed. Some of the employees, however, enjoyed making jokes about her. There were whispers and snickers when Margaret passed by, some not-so-kind remarks made when they thought she couldn't hear. They assumed that someone like her, dressed in plain clothes, with her cleaning supplies in hand, could never be anything more than just a cleaning lady. They took pride in their jobs, their fancy offices, and their business suits, thinking they were better than the quiet woman who swept their floors. When Margaret worked, she made sure everything was perfect, though no one seemed to care. The floors had to be spotless, the desks perfectly arranged, and the restrooms cleaned down to the smallest detail. The employees, focused on their meetings and tasks, didn't stop to think about how much effort went into making sure the office looked the way it did. But Margaret noticed everything. She saw how some workers had little respect for her job. Some made jokes, laughing among themselves about how someone like her could have such a boring, lowly job. They never guessed she was more than what they saw on the surface. Her days were long. After everyone left, she would finish cleaning, making sure the office looked the same way it had when she started. She always left quietly, slipping out unnoticed, her job complete. But what the employees didn't know was that Margaret wasn't just a cleaner. She owned the company that cleaned the office. She had built it from the ground up, a business that had grown over the years. While she had her reasons for not sharing her story with the office workers, it wasn't because she was ashamed of what she had accomplished. She simply chose to remain humble. But Margaret had seen enough of the way people treated others based on their appearance. She wasn't going to remain invisible forever. Something was about to change, and the people who had laughed at her would soon learn just how wrong they were. For now, she kept her head down, kept working, and prepared for the day when they would finally understand who she truly was. Margaret's day always started before the sun rose, and she had a set routine that she followed without fail. She'd get up early, often when the world was still dark and quiet, making her way through the streets as the first light of the day began to peek over the horizon. She preferred this time of day, when everything was still and peaceful, and the world hadn't yet started rushing around. It gave her time to think, to plan, and to get her thoughts in order before facing the busy day ahead. When she arrived at the office building, the parking lot was empty, save for a few delivery trucks that had arrived to drop off supplies for the office. She would park her car and head inside, where the elevator was still waiting, ready to take her up to the top floors. Margaret didn't mind being the first to arrive. In fact, she liked it. It gave her time to prepare the office for the day ahead. With her cleaning cart in hand, she would start her work in the lobby, dusting the counters, polishing the windows, and making sure everything was just right. As she moved through the building, she noticed the small details that others overlooked: the fingerprints on the glass doors, the dust on the office chairs, the tiny crumbs left behind from someone's lunch. Margaret was thorough, and it was this attention to detail that made her so respected in the cleaning industry, even if no one in the office seemed to notice. While most of the office workers were still asleep or on their way to work, Margaret had already cleaned the lobby, the conference rooms, and the restrooms. She moved with purpose, making sure every area was spotless. She was quiet and focused, not interested in making small talk with the employees she passed along the way. She didn't mind the silence. In fact, she preferred it. The quiet allowed her to think about her plans for the future and the ways in which she had built her business from the ground up. As the day went on, the office would start filling up with employees. They came in with their busy schedules, rushing to meetings, grabbing coffee, and talking to one another. Margaret didn't interact with them much, but she noticed the way they interacted with each other. She saw how some people treated their colleagues with kindness and respect, while others ignored them, acting like their jobs were more important than anyone else's. Margaret had witnessed it all: the snide remarks, the jokes, and the way people looked down on those who seemed to be in a lesser position. But she didn't let it bother her. She had learned a long time ago that people's opinions didn't define her. When the employees would make fun of her, it didn't faze Margaret. She had grown used to the mockery over the years, and she had learned to rise above it. She didn't need anyone's approval or validation. She was proud of the work she did, and she knew that her role in the office was important. After all, without the cleaning staff, the office wouldn't be the neat and welcoming place it was. But no one seemed to recognize that. They simply assumed she was just another part of the background, a fixture in the office they could ignore. It was in these quiet moments that Margaret's determination grew stronger. She knew she was capable of so much more, but she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She was content with her work, and she was focused on the bigger picture. One day, the office workers would understand. They would realize that Margaret was far more than just the cleaning lady. They would learn that she had built an empire of her own, one that was about to change their lives forever. One afternoon, as Margaret was going about her work, a group of employees gathered near the coffee machine, chatting and laughing among themselves. They were talking about their busy schedules and the big meeting they had planned for later in the day. As usual, no one paid much attention to Margaret as she cleaned around them. But this time, their conversation took a turn. One of the employees, a man named Tom, looked over at Margaret and snickered. "I wonder how much longer the cleaning lady's going to be scrubbing the floors. She's always here early," he said, not caring that Margaret was right there, just a few feet away. The others laughed along with him. "I bet she doesn't even have any other plans in her life. She's probably just here to clean and go home. Can't be an exciting life." Another woman, Linda, chimed in. They continued to make fun of Margaret, assuming she was just some older woman with no ambition, stuck in a dead-end job. They didn't know anything about her, of course. To them, Margaret was just the cleaning lady, a woman who wore simple clothes, didn't speak much, and seemed to be happy in her quiet corner of the office. Margaret heard their words, but she didn't respond. She simply continued with her work, wiping down a desk, making sure every surface was spotless. The comments didn't hurt her the way they might have once. Over the years, she had learned to brush off the ridicule. She knew the truth of her own life, and she didn't need to defend herself to anyone. But there was something about the way they spoke so casually, without even considering that she might be listening, that made her heart tighten. It wasn't the first time she had overheard such conversations, but this time felt different. It wasn't just their words. It was the dismissive way they acted, the way they had no idea who she really was. It wasn't just about her being a woman, or black, or in a low-paying job. It was about their complete lack of respect for anyone who wasn't in a position of power, anyone who wasn't seen as important. Margaret paused for a moment, her cleaning cloth in her hand. She thought back to the days when she first started her company, cleaning offices like this one. She had faced many challenges, often working late into the night, struggling to make ends meet. There were times when she didn't know if she could keep going, when it seemed like the whole world was against her. But Margaret never gave up. She kept working hard, building her business step by step, until one day she realized she had created something much bigger than just a cleaning service. In that moment, Margaret made a decision. It wasn't the first time she had thought about revealing the truth to the office workers, but something about this conversation pushed her to act. They thought she was just the cleaning lady, someone to be laughed at, someone whose life didn't matter. But they were wrong. Margaret knew that it was time for them to understand who she really was. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows and show them that appearances could be deceiving. The next day, she would take a step that would change everything. Margaret was ready to stop being invisible. She was done with being underestimated. It was time to let the truth come out. And when it did, those who had laughed and scorned her would have to face the reality they had been blind to all along. Margaret's mind raced with thoughts as she finished cleaning the office that evening. She couldn't stop thinking about the comments from the group of employees that day. The way they laughed, unaware of who she truly was. It wasn't the first time she had been treated like she was invisible, but something about this particular moment made her realize that she had been hiding too long. She had worked so hard to build her business, and yet, here she was, still being underestimated and dismissed by people who knew nothing about her journey. As she walked out of the office that evening, Margaret's thoughts lingered on her past. She remembered the early days when she started her cleaning business. At the time, she had very little, just a few basic supplies and a determination to succeed. She had worked long hours, sometimes cleaning the offices late into the night after everyone else had gone home. The work was hard, but Margaret was used to hard work. She knew what it was like to struggle, to face challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. But no matter how difficult things got, Margaret never gave up. She had built her business from the ground up. She had gained the trust of her clients through dedication and attention to detail. Word of mouth spread, and soon enough, her small cleaning service began to grow. She hired a few employees and expanded her operations. What started as a one-woman show had turned into a thriving business, but Margaret never let her success go to her head. She stayed humble, keeping a low profile, and focused on the work. She preferred to stay in the background, quietly running the company that she had built, rather than seeking attention or recognition. But now, as she walked out of the office building that night, she realized that her desire for privacy had kept her in the shadows for far too long. She had built something powerful, and yet no one knew the truth. No one knew that the cleaning lady they so casually dismissed was the one who owned the cleaning company, the one who made sure their office stayed spotless. Margaret knew it was time for that to change. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the office just like any other day. But this time, something was different. She was no longer content to remain in the background. She was ready to reveal the truth, to show the employees that the woman they had laughed at and scorned was not just the cleaning lady, but the owner of the company. It wasn't about bragging or proving herself to anyone. It was about showing them the value of hard work and determination, regardless of the role someone played in the office. As Margaret began her usual routine, cleaning the offices and preparing for the day ahead, she noticed the employees starting to trickle in. She didn't let the nervousness in her stomach distract her. She kept her focus, knowing that today would be different. Today, the truth would come to light. She moved quietly through the office, just as she always did, but in the back of her mind, she was preparing for the moment when everything would change. She had worked so hard to build her business, and it was time to stop hiding. Margaret knew that she was about to take a bold step, one that would surprise everyone, and perhaps even shock some of the employees who had underestimated her. But in that moment, she didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt a sense of pride and excitement. The day had finally come. The time had come to show them who she truly was. The day was finally here. Margaret arrived at the office with a sense of quiet determination. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew it was time to step into the light and let everyone see who she really was. As usual, the office was starting to come alive with the first employees trickling in, gathering around the coffee machine, chatting about their plans for the day. Margaret moved through the building, cleaning as she always did, keeping a low profile, but knowing that today was different. Around mid-morning, the tension in the air started to build. The office was filled with the usual sounds of phones ringing and people typing away at their computers. But there was an undercurrent of excitement, too. Today was the day of a major company-wide meeting. The employees were buzzing, wondering what the big topic would be. Margaret overheard bits and pieces of their conversations, but she didn't pay much attention. She was focused on the task at hand, keeping everything clean and tidy while preparing for the moment when she would reveal the truth. As the meeting time approached, Margaret quietly made her way to the front of the building, where the conference room was located. She had been to many meetings over the years, but today would be unlike any other. She had decided to attend this one, not as a cleaner, but as the owner of the company that had been cleaning their offices for so long. She had spent the last few years watching the employees and listening to their conversations, and now it was her turn to speak. The meeting began, and the employees gathered around the long table in the conference room. They were all focused on the issue at hand, unaware that the person they had scorned was about to join them. Margaret waited patiently outside the room, just as she had waited for so many years. But this time, it was different. This time, she was ready. When the time came, Margaret entered the conference room quietly, just as she always did. She walked to the front of the room, where the company leaders were gathered, and paused for a moment, looking around at the employees who had made fun of her in the past. Some of them looked up in surprise when they saw her, but most of them didn't recognize her right away. To them, she was just the cleaning lady, a familiar figure who had been working in the background for so long. Margaret cleared her throat softly, and the room fell silent. She could feel the eyes of the employees on her, but she didn't let that distract her. She had a message to deliver, and she wasn't going to back down now. "I know you all have been wondering who I am and why I'm here," she began, her voice steady but calm. "I'm Margaret, and I own the company that provides the cleaning services for this office. I have been cleaning your offices for years, but I've never made my identity known to you. It's time you all knew the truth." The room went still, and for a moment, no one said anything. The employees exchanged confused glances, trying to process what they had just heard. Margaret took a deep breath and continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've heard the jokes, the laughs, and the comments you've made about me over the years," she said. "I've heard how you've assumed I'm just a cleaning lady with no ambition, no future. But I want you to know that I built my business from the ground up. I worked hard, just like you, to get where I am today. And it's time for you to realize that appearances can be deceiving." The employees were stunned, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Some of them looked embarrassed, while others seemed to be trying to understand what was happening. Margaret stood there for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to settle in. She wasn't angry, but she could see the impact her revelation was having. "I didn't come here today to seek validation," Margaret continued, her voice softening. "I came here to show you that hard work, no matter what role you play, matters. I'm proud of what I've built, and I hope that you will take this moment to remember that no one is ever just the cleaning lady or the office worker. We all have a story, and we all deserve respect." As she finished speaking, Margaret turned and quietly left the room, leaving the employees to process what they had just learned. She didn't need any applause or recognition. The truth was out, and that was enough for her. Margaret had made her mark, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace knowing that she had shown them all the strength she had carried with her every day. After Margaret left the conference room, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She knew that what she had just done would change the way things worked in the office, and she was ready to face whatever came next. It wasn't about getting approval or recognition. It was about standing up for herself and making sure the people who had overlooked her knew the truth. The employees were still sitting in stunned silence. They hadn't expected the woman they had so casually dismissed to be the one who owned the very company that had been cleaning their offices for years. Margaret's words lingered in the air, and the room was filled with the sounds of shifting chairs and nervous murmurs. But Margaret had made her point. She didn't need to stay any longer to explain herself. She had shown them who she really was, and that was enough. As she walked down the hallway, back to her cleaning cart, she overheard some of the employees talking quietly among themselves. They seemed unsure of how to react to what they had just learned. There was a mix of shock, confusion, and even a little embarrassment. Margaret could hear one person say, "I had no idea. I always thought she was just here to clean. I can't believe she owns the company." Another voice chimed in, "Yeah, I feel pretty bad now. I've never thought much about the people who clean around here. I guess we all took them for granted." Margaret smiled to herself as she overheard their conversation. It wasn't the kind of recognition she had been looking for, but it showed that her message was sinking in. The employees were starting to realize how wrong they had been in judging people based on appearances, and that, in itself, was a small victory. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Margaret went about her usual routine, but there was a difference in the way people looked at her. Some of the employees who had once ignored her now gave her a nod or a smile. Others still seemed a little uncomfortable, unsure of how to approach her after hearing the truth. But Margaret wasn't worried. She had done what she needed to do. The respect she had been looking for wasn't something that could be forced. It would come in time. As she finished her work and prepared to leave for the day, Margaret felt a quiet sense of pride. She had made herself visible. She had broken through the wall of assumptions and judgments, showing the world that there was more to her than they had ever imagined. But more importantly, she had reminded everyone that no matter what role someone played, they deserved respect. That night, as she sat at home, Margaret reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the years of hard work that had brought her to this point, the countless hours she had spent building her business, the sacrifices she had made, and the challenges she had overcome. She had done it all on her own, without seeking recognition or approval. But now, her story was out there for the world to see. She didn't need anyone to praise her or feel sorry for her. What mattered was that she had stayed true to herself, and that was the greatest victory of all. Margaret had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up and be seen for who you truly are. And that was something no one could take away from her. The next day, when Margaret returned to the office, things were different. The atmosphere felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. There was a new sense of respect in the air. It wasn't immediate, and it didn't happen all at once, but Margaret could feel it. People were starting to see her as more than just the cleaning lady. They were starting to see her as a woman who had worked hard, built something from nothing, and earned her place. Margaret wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. The office was no longer just a place she cleaned. It was a place where she had made a difference, and in her heart, that was all that mattered. As the days passed, Margaret could see a noticeable shift in the way the office workers treated her. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was there, small gestures of kindness, respectful nods when they passed by, and a growing sense of acknowledgement. It felt strange at first, but Margaret appreciated the shift. She knew it wasn't about expecting them to suddenly admire her. It was about breaking down the walls that had separated her from them for so long. Margaret continued to do her job as she always had, quietly going about her cleaning tasks. But now, there was a newfound sense of purpose in every step she took. She was no longer just another employee going unnoticed. She was someone who had earned respect, not because of her position, but because of her actions, her determination, and her ability to stay true to herself, despite being overlooked for so long. One morning, while Margaret was dusting the shelves in the lobby, Tom, the man who had mocked her so openly during the earlier conversation, approached her. He was holding a cup of coffee, looking a bit nervous, as if unsure of how to begin. Margaret paused for a moment and looked at him. "Margaret, right?" Tom started, his voice a little awkward. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the things I said before. I really didn't know. I had no idea who you were, and I just assumed things. That was wrong." Margaret smiled politely, though she didn't immediately respond. She had heard apologies before, but this one felt different. It wasn't forced. It came from a place of realization. "It's okay," Margaret said, her voice warm but calm. "People make assumptions all the time. It's not easy to look past what you think you know. But it's never too late to change that. Tom nodded, looking genuinely regretful. I've learned a lot in the last few days. I realize how much I've taken for granted and how quick I've been to judge people based on the work they do. I think I see things differently now. Margaret's smile widened slightly. I'm glad to hear that. She turned back to her work, wiping down the surface with careful movements. Tom stood there for a moment, watching her, as if contemplating something. Again, I'm sorry, he said before walking away, a little more thoughtful than he had been before. Margaret didn't expect everyone to suddenly start treating her like a hero, nor did she want them to. But the fact that Tom had acknowledged his mistake and apologized meant more than words could say. It was a small victory, but it was one that felt powerful, a reminder that even the smallest change in perspective could make a big difference. Throughout the rest of the day, more employees approached her with similar apologies, each one offering their own words of respect. Linda, the woman who had made fun of her in the past, stopped by as well, looking genuinely contrite. I just wanted to say that I've been thinking about what you said, Linda began. And I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I never realized how wrong I was. Margaret looked at Linda and gave a simple nod. Thank you, she said softly. She didn't need any grand gestures. A sincere apology and a willingness to change were enough. It was clear to Margaret that the truth she had shared had made an impact. The employees weren't just treating her differently out of guilt. They were starting to see her for who she truly was, a person with a story, with value, and with a life far beyond what they had ever assumed. And while the journey hadn't been easy, Margaret knew that the change she had set in motion would ripple outward, slowly but steadily. She had given them something to think about, something to reflect on in their own lives. As the days turned into weeks, Margaret's presence in the office continued to evolve. The respect she had earned wasn't just for the work she did, but for the strength and resilience she had shown. And though the employees had begun to see her differently, Margaret knew the most important change had happened within herself. She no longer had to hide or remain in the background. She was confident in her own worth, and she didn't need anyone's approval to define her. In the quiet moments between her tasks, Margaret reflected on her journey. She had started with nothing, worked her way up through the long hours and hard work, and now she had earned her place, not just in the office, but in the hearts and minds of those who had once overlooked her. And that was a victory she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The weeks that followed Margaret's revelation brought a new sense of change, not just in the office, but within herself. The employees had adjusted to seeing her in a different light, and while they continued with their daily tasks, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had learned an important lesson, never to judge anyone by their job or appearance. And though Margaret hadn't asked for their apologies, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment in knowing that they had taken the time to reflect on their actions and words. Margaret didn't need their recognition to feel validated, but it was clear that the way people treated each other had shifted. The office atmosphere had grown more respectful, and there was a noticeable increase in the overall sense of camaraderie. People smiled more, said hello in the hallways, and even made small talk when they saw her. Margaret felt a warm sense of belonging. But more than that, she had regained something much deeper, her own sense of pride and self-respect. One day, as she was cleaning the break room, she overheard a conversation between two employees. They were talking about how their team could improve office morale and make things run more smoothly. One of them mentioned how, before Margaret's revelation, they had never truly considered how hard the cleaning staff worked. It's not just about keeping the office clean, the employee said. It's about respect. We need to treat everyone here as equals, no matter what their role is. Margaret showed us that. Hearing those words made Margaret smile. It was proof that the message had sunk in. The simple act of revealing the truth about her ownership had sparked a change in the way people saw their colleagues, and the office environment had improved because of it. She wasn't seeking to change the entire company, but if her actions could lead to even a small shift in how people treated each other, that was enough for her. Margaret didn't stop her cleaning business. She continued to manage and expand it with the same dedication she always had. She brought on more employees and worked on building strong relationships with her clients. As her company grew, so did her confidence. She had learned to embrace her success, to stand tall in her achievements, and to be proud of the journey that had brought her here. Margaret had created something that not only supported her, but also created jobs and opportunities for others. Her company's reputation for integrity and high-quality service began to spread. More businesses began seeking her cleaning services, and Margaret was invited to speak at conferences about her journey as a successful entrepreneur. She was often asked what had driven her to keep going, and she always gave the same answer: determination. Determination to prove to herself that she could succeed, and determination to show others that no matter where you start in life, with hard work and perseverance, you can rise above any obstacles. Years later, Margaret's business was thriving, and her influence extended beyond just the cleaning industry. She had become a role model for many, especially women and people of color who had been overlooked or underestimated. She used her platform to share her story, encouraging others to never give up, no matter how hard the road might seem. And though she had achieved great success, Margaret never forgot where she came from. She still made time for her employees, offering mentorship to those who were looking to grow in their careers, just as she had done when she first started. Margaret had spent years being invisible to others, but now she was not only seen, she was celebrated. She knew that her story wasn't just about her success. It was about the journey, the struggles, the setbacks, and the triumphs that had shaped her into the person she had become. And through it all, Margaret had never stopped believing in herself. Looking back on the journey, Margaret knew that the most important thing she had gained wasn't money or recognition. It was the understanding that no one's worth should ever be determined by their job or appearance. She had shown the world that everyone, no matter their role, deserved to be seen, respected, and valued. And in doing so, Margaret had not only changed her own life, but had touched the lives of many others in ways she never could have imagined.